Today our scripture is Genesis 19:23 through 38. I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Now, Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him that we may preserve offspring from our father." So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, "Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father." So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus, both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day.
In the book Chase the Lion, Mark Batterson writes that in 1983, Lorne Whitehead published an article about the domino chain reaction. So you can picture it in your mind, right? A domino chain. You knock over a domino and it sets off a chain reaction that can knock down hundreds of dominoes in a matter of seconds. But the unique significance of Whitehead's research was discovering that a domino is capable of knocking over a domino that is 1.5 times its size. So a 2-inch domino can topple a 3-inch domino, and a 3-inch domino can topple a 4.5-inch domino, and a 4.5-inch domino can topple, well, you get the point. By the time you get to the 18th domino, you could knock over the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Of course, it's leaning, so that's not fair. The 23rd domino could knock over the Eiffel Tower. And by the time you get to the 29th domino, you could take down the Empire State Building. In the realm of mathematics, there are 2 types of progression, linear and geometric. Linear progression is 2 + 2 = 4. Geometric progression is compound doubling. 2 × 2 = 4. If you take 30 linear steps, you're 90 feet from where you started. But if you take 30 geometric steps, you've circled the earth 26 times. So I called my son, the mathematician. He's an algebraic geometer, whatever that means. And asked him about these equations. He said, yeah, that's basically it. Linear is more addition and geometry is more multiplication. See, I needed him to simple it down for me because of my simple mind. And so can you imagine this kind of exponential equation? It seems to me that this is the way that faith works, both for good and for bad. So the biblical principle is you sow what you reap, but often it blows up exponentially. Do you remember Lot? Yes, you do, because we just read about him. He was the one that had herds and flocks and riches galore fighting. His herdsmen were fighting with Abraham's herdsmen. He was a wealthy man, and now he's drunk in a cave with his 2 daughters. What happened? Whoa. Well, so what I want to do today is just to look at some of the things that Lot lost and then make some applications to it. So what are the things in this process that Lot lived through his life? What are some of the things that he lost? Well, the first one that I want you to see, and this is not an exhaustive list probably, but the first one I want you to see is that he lost his possessions. So we know that he was wealthy. All the way back in chapter 13, verse 5, and Lot, who went with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And now he has nothing. So how did that happen? Well, it all started with a look, right? Chapter 13, verse 10, and Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. He didn't just look down there and say, well, that might be a nice place to go. He looked with desire. It held out promise for him that he could improve his lot, that he could have more ease. What seems obvious is that wealth wasn't enough. He needed more comfort, the security of a city. But clearly, as we see the progression for Lot, he wanted to be in Sodom, because we see him near Sodom, then we see him in Sodom, then we see him at the gate with the elders of Sodom. He had moved himself into a place of prominence in the city. And even though it tells us in 2 Peter that he was grieved over all the sin that he saw in Sodom, it still wasn't enough for him to move away. There was something holding him tightly there. It seems that the draw of wealth and ease and comfort was too much for him. So at the end of the day, it seems that what he wanted and what the people of Sodom wanted really was the same thing, right? He may have been grieved over some of the things that they wanted, or that they were doing, but ultimately what they wanted and what he wanted was the same thing. That's why they lived together in a city. That's why he wouldn't leave the city. So what was it that they wanted? I read this a couple of weeks ago from Ezekiel 16:49. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. Pride, excess food, prosperous ease, and they didn't give a whit about the poor. Of course, this isn't just Sodom. This has been with us as long as there have been people. So another one of the reasons that I'm a Christian is because the Bible talks about humanity like it really is. Pride, excess food, and I forgot it. Pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease. See, the notion of pride, excess food, and prosperous ease, and forgetting about the poor and the needy could actually be a direct description of our own culture, right? It's really a description of every culture. It's actually an apt description of my own heart. I live with pride, with excess food and with prosperous ease. We all do. So, that's because there's an enemy of our souls. Not only is it from within us, but there's an enemy of our souls that has put a deception out there, and it's one that we have believed wholeheartedly. He did this in the Garden of Eden, the very first place he did this. He lied to Adam and Eve, and it's very, very compelling. He had pride. If you eat of the tree, you can be like God, right? He had excess food. When you get prohibited something, all you want is that thing, right? That's what our kids do, but we do it as well. So they were told they couldn't eat that. Well, then they're not getting all the food that they want, because not only do they get all this, they want that one as well. Well, they took it. They took it. And prosperous ease, if you eat of the tree, it will make your life better. You will know all things, and knowledge is power, and power means a better life. Prosperous ease. These are the same lies that have been with us from the very, very beginning. The Bible doesn't sugarcoat it. The Bible tells it like it is, and it is true of all of us. And it's a bold-faced lie that we pursue these things. We have been falling for it ever since. In the blog, The Marginalian, it's quite the name for a blog, Maria Popova writes an article entitled, Yes to Life, Viktor Frankel's Lost Lectures. And this is what she says. Viktor Frankel was an Austrian Holocaust survivor, a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and an author. His writings on man's search for meaning in the face of horrors like the Holocaust made him a highly regarded source for thoughts on the subject. When life's trials and sufferings are overwhelming, how and where can meaning be found? He lived when global consumerism was at its beginnings. In this analogy, he asserts that consumerism's offerings of pleasure, as well as other types of pleasure, do not and cannot contribute to any useful meaning or understanding of life. Let us imagine a man who has been sentenced to death, and a few hours before his execution has been told he is free to decide on the menu for his last meal. The guard comes into his cell and asks him what he wants to eat. He offers him all kinds of delicacies, but the man rejects all his suggestions. He thinks to himself that it is quite irrelevant whether he stuffs good food into the stomach of his organism or not. Oh, that was bad. He stuffs good food into the stomach of his organism, and we're not. As in a few hours, it will be a corpse. And even the feelings of pleasure that could still be felt in the organism's cerebral ganglia seem pointless in view of the fact that in 2 hours, they will be destroyed forever. But the whole of life stands in the face of death. And if this man had been right, then our whole lives would also be meaningless, were we only to strive for pleasure and nothing else, preferably the most pleasure and the highest degree of pleasure possible. Pleasure in itself cannot give our existence meaning. Thus, the lack of pleasure cannot take away meaning from life, which now seems obvious to us. I wonder how many decisions that we make are based on the easy way, the path of least resistance, the path of untruth, that somehow prosperous ease, will give our lives meaning, will make our lives more meaningful. It's not true. It's a lie all the way back from the Garden of Eden. It's a lie that has been perpetrated throughout the centuries, and it's a lie that's still here with us today, and we fall for it. We fall for it. For Lot, it was disastrous. He lost everything because the judgment of God fell on Sodom. It's really only because of Abraham's faithfulness that Lot was saved, I believe. But it was not only disastrous in terms of losing his possessions. I think that his seeking after prosperous ease led to the downfall of his family as well. So let's look at the second thing he lost. He lost his marriage. So we really don't know anything about his wife. I'm sure there have been lots of sermons preached on Lot's wife, but we only have the one verse. Let me read the verse before that. It's verse 24. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. I guess 2 verses before. So this is 26. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So what's going on here? So the angels had warned them, right? In verse 17, it says, and as they brought them out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. So why would she look back? Well, do you remember the longing in Lot's eyes? Seems to me that he had perpetrated a DNA in his family for the longing for prosperous ease or security or whatever it was that she had in the city. So we can say that she is the responsible one for that, but I would say Lot also was responsible for the culture of his family. As the head of this family, Lot was responsible for doing everything in his power to protect his family. I believe that's the job of the husband. But clearly, they had all gotten comfortable. But not only comfortable, they'd fully bought into the lifestyle and prosperousness of Sodom. But here they are running for their lives, and Lot's wife must be terrified because she's losing what is her very life. If you base your life on the stuff you have, if you base your life on prosperous ease, to lose it feels like an absolute death. Her existence as she knows it is over. Clearly, she had gloried in that existence. Here they are running for their lives, and so she looks back. Look of longing. What do you long for? And God turns her into a pillar of salt. He warned them. She dies. She dies. So yeah, it's her fault for turning around. But I believe that Lot has just as much fault here for creating a culture where they were after prosperous ease. See, this is what I want to say this morning to married couples. One of the reasons that God put us into marriages was to learn to give ourselves in sacrificial love for one another. So we have with Lot a yearning for ease and prosperity. I don't think he thought one whit about his wife when he was looking down in the Jordan Valley. I think he just thought this will just be great for all of us. We're going to be able to go out here and we're going to be able to do our thing and get away from Abraham. Get away from Abraham. We have him longing for ease and prosperity. And when Abraham gave him a choice of where he would move, his first thought should have been, what is going to be best for my family? See, when Ephesians 5 tells men that they are to love their wives as Christ loved the church, the bar is impossibly high. What does he mean? It means that men, your number one job, if we want to summarize the whole thing, your number one job is to work so that your wife will flourish. Spiritually, emotionally, physically, in every way. This is what it means to love your wife, that she will flourish. What does it mean for her to flourish? Well, that's going to be different for all of them, right? But flourishing spiritually, emotionally, physically. Lot should have seen that his wife was in too deep. Her very life was Sodom and all that it offered. Husbands, why do you make the decisions that you do? Is it to promote yourself or your career or your comfort or what you want? If only my wife did this, that, or the other, I would be happy. If only she would change this way or that way or the other way, I would be happy. That's not the way you look at it. When you got married, you married a sinner. Surprise! And the call is not figure out your love based on what she does. It's you decide you're going to make her flourish. I don't think Lot did it. I think most of us struggle with it, but I'll leave that there. He lost also his daughters. So the story of the daughters, it's almost worse than if they had turned around and turned into a pillar of, it is worse. It'd been better if they'd have turned into a pillar of salt too, right? But in so many ways, they probably didn't know any better. They grew up in Sodom. We don't know how many years there. But here we have the prosperous ease. Everything they wanted, probably. And I don't think they knew any better. These girls had lost their fiancés. Remember, their fiancés laughed at Lot. Thought he was joking when he said they needed to get out of the city. Probably the only reason that the wife and the daughters left was because he insisted, and they grabbed them. The angels grabbed them. The fiancés were lost. So now they're in a cave with their father. Having children in the ancient Near East was the highest priority for a woman. That was her glory in those days. It was the reason she lived. And here they are in a cave in the middle of nowhere with their father. So they concoct the scheme. They get their father drunk, and he becomes the father of their children. It's almost unthinkable. It is unthinkable for us. No sugarcoating here. Can we think of a more terrible scenario for Lot? The one who had all these riches, he ends up in a cave in incest. So what are the results of this? Well, you remember the exponential thing I talked about? The geometric formula for exponential? That's what this is. So, the two children that were born were Moab and Ben-Ami. Moab means from father, and Ben-Ami means son of my people. The nations that came from these two children were a thorn in the side of the Israelites for many, many centuries. In fact, if you remember, when the Israelites had wandered through the wilderness, they'd been punished by God for rebelling and not wanting to go into the land and being afraid. And so they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. But as that time was coming to an end, they were approaching the promised land again, and they came to Moab, right? They came to Moab. And the king of Moab, Balak, summoned a prophet, Balaam, and he wanted Balaam to curse the Israelites. Well, Balaam wouldn't do that. But we find out later that Balaam did give Balak instructions. He said, this is what you do. You get your women to seduce the Israelite men. And that's what they did. Not just sexually. They seduced them to follow after their gods. This is what happened. This is so many years, centuries later. Moab was used to get Israelites to walk away from God. Now, their main god was Moloch. And Moloch was a god that required child sacrifice in the fire. And many centuries later, remember King Manasseh? He's a descendant of David. This is so far later. He actually offers one of his children as a sacrifice to Moloch. Do you see how this cave experience just exponentially blew up and became this huge thing for Israel for centuries to come? Parents, you can't just let your kids grow up. You gotta pay the price to be in their lives. It's too important to be willing to be strong in raising them. If you're convinced about something for them, don't shilly-shally. It's too important. They need direction. We've got to be strong in love, strong in direction. Here's another one. Strong in repentance. Strong in weakness, but strong in purpose. What will make your kids flourish? I guarantee it's not prosperous ease. I guarantee it's not everybody gets a trophy. I guarantee it's not feeling sorry for them. What will make your kids flourish? Well, only Jesus will make your kids flourish. So here's the thing about that. Your kids aren't stupid. They know what makes your life tick. Oh, you may be in church, but they know what makes your life tick. They're with you all the time. They know what makes your life tick. If you're waiting for the church to be the influence in your kids' lives for Jesus, you're going to be in trouble. We only get your kids 1 hour a week. Even TV has more influence over them than we do. I just want to encourage parents as an old guy whose kids are gone. Wish I'd done a lot of things differently. Love your kids well. Love your kids well. Don't let the geometric equation be true in their lives that yields exponentially bad things. Be the equation that yields exponentially good things. Let's get them while they're little. Let's get them while they're little. Let's not settle like Lot did. I think he settled. So I have one more thing to talk to you about. You remember the angels told Lot that he should run for their lives and they should go up to the hills. Lot didn't want to go up to the hills. Why not? Well, many commentaries think that what he was saying, the angels were saying to him was, you need to go back up to Mamre where Abraham lived. They think that the angels were saying to him, go home, Lot. You've made a disaster out of these things. Go home. Go back to where Abraham is. Go home to your uncle. That's where life is right. He's seeking after me. Go home to where God was your God and your possessions weren't as important. Go home to where your priorities are aligned correctly. Go home, Lot. But he doesn't want to go home. He says, let me go to that city, the Zoar right there. Let me go there. And so they say, okay, go there. But he doesn't stay there. He leaves for the hills himself. Why does he leave Zoar? I think he's afraid. It says he's afraid, actually. The passage, verse 30, says he was afraid to live in Zoar. We don't know exactly why, but I think he got there and he probably realized they were as bad as Sodom, and he was afraid God's going to come down in judgment on that city as well. So he got out of there, and they went up to this cave that couldn't have been where the angels were sending him, just to some cave where he would have incest with his daughters. That couldn't have been the way he was saying. I think he was telling him to go back to Abraham. Lot went his own way. Isn't this just like us, brothers and sisters? We're being called home to Jesus. But somehow we don't think that the principle, we reap what we sow, somehow we don't think it applies to us. Or that our pursuit of easy living, somehow we think it's going to yield great results with our kids. We're happy when our kids get into a good school, get good grades, get a good job, make good money, and they live lives of prosperous ease. We tend to be happy with those things. That seems to be the thing we're most happy about. And we've bought into some kind of a lie on these things, and we're happy that we have prosperous ease as well. But brothers and sisters, if we look at the life of Lot, this is a life of insanity. It's a life of insanity. So how do we change this? You see, the principle of you reap what you sow is true across the board, except only in one place. There is one place where it's not true. See, we've been sowing for ourselves for so long, but the only place that we will be saved from reaping what we have sown is in Jesus. In the gospel, Jesus says, whatever you have sown in the past, no matter the self-centeredness, no matter the mess that you have made, here's what I give to you. You reap, and I will sow what you reap. See that in the gospel? See, much like Lot, we've been enamored with prosperous ease. We've been self-centered with our spouses and done things for our own pleasure and good instead of for them. We've been unwilling to stand firm with our kids because it's too much of a hassle. These have all been self-centered ways of living, and this sowing should have earned us destruction. But Jesus comes along and he says, I will endure the punishment for what you have sown. What I'm offering you is for you to come home. Come home. Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. But then, like Lot, we say, well, that doesn't really sound right. If we go home to Mamre where Abraham is, we'll be put under his thumb. If we come to Jesus and we come under him, then he's going to put all these requirements on us, and we can't do this and we can't do that, and we got to go this way and we got to go that way. We got to have one rule after another. It will be so oppressive. I would rather just find a cave. And so we run up the mountains, and there we are in a cave with nothing but our own consequences. But brothers and sisters, this is insanity. See, Jesus reverses the curse. Jesus pours out grace upon grace. Oh yeah, some of our consequences still are with us, but and some of the circumstances that we're in aren't great, and we live with the consequences of some of the things that we do, but that's not the point. The point is that he invites us home, and home in the Christian sense is not a place, it's a person. It's a person. It's the one that gave everything for us, took the consequences of our sowing our wild oats. And he paid the penalty, and he invites us home. Do you want to go home? He will transform your life. He will transform your family's life. He will transform your marriage. But it requires dying to ourselves and going home to Jesus and saying, what do you want from me? I will do whatever you say because your way is the way. I want exponential joy, not exponential sorrow. And we have a Savior that opens his arms wide and pours out his grace on those that will embrace him. That's the gospel. And the gospel changes everything. Let's pray.